One day, a young man named Ion sat alone on the edge of his bed, staring at the faint crack in the wall that ran from the ceiling to the floor like a quiet scar. It had been there for years, but today it felt different, like it was staring back at him, judging him. The room was silent, except for the slow spinning of the old fan above his head, making a tired clicking sound every few seconds. Ion's phone lay beside him, its screen dark now, but just minutes ago it had been glowing with videos of other people living lives that seemed brighter, bigger, and more meaningful than his own. He sighed and ran his hands through his hair. He was only 20, but he already felt late. Late to succeed, late to start, late to become someone. He didn't know when this feeling had begun. Maybe it started after he failed his first important exam. Maybe it was when his best friend moved away and never really stayed in touch. Or maybe it was when he realized that nobody was coming to save him. Life wasn't going to suddenly become magical just because he wanted it to. Ion leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. His dreams used to be loud. When he was younger, he wanted to build things that mattered. He wanted to create something that would outlive him. He wanted to prove to himself that he wasn't ordinary. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had become quiet. They hadn't died, but they had stopped speaking. Now they only whispered. "You're not ready," they said. "You'll fail. You'll embarrass yourself." He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling again. "What's the point?" whispered to himself. Outside his window, the world was moving. Cars passed. People walked. Someone laughed in the distance. Life continued, with or without him. That night, Ion fell asleep without meaning to. His phone was still beside him, his room still dim, his thoughts still unfinished. And that's when it happened. He woke up, but something was wrong. The room looked the same. But it felt heavier, like the air had thickened. The fan above him had stopped moving. The silence was deeper now, unnatural. Ion sat up slowly. That's when he saw him. There was someone sitting on the chair across the room. Ion froze. The man was leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. His face was calm, but his eyes were intense, like they carried stories that Ion couldn't yet understand. "Who are you?" Ion asked, his voice barely steady. The man didn't answer immediately. He just watched him, and then he smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile. It wasn't cruel. It was sad. "I've been waiting for you to notice me," the man said quietly. Ion's heart began to pound. "How did you get in here?" he asked. The man tilted his head slightly. "I was always here," he replied. Ion stood up quickly, his legs trembling. "It's not possible." The man leaned back in the chair. "It is," he said. "You just never looked." Ion stared at him, trying to understand. The man looked familiar, but Ion couldn't explain why. It was like looking at a memory he hadn't lived yet. "Who are you?" Ion asked again. This time the man answered. "I'm you," he said. Ion laughed nervously. "It's not funny." "I'm not joking." Silence filled the room. Ion looked closer. The man's face was older. His posture was stronger. His eyes were clearer. There was confidence there, but also something else. Pain. Experience. "Truth, you're me," Ion whispered. The man nodded. "I'm your future?" Ion shook his head. "This isn't real. I'm dreaming." The future Ion didn't argue. Instead, he asked a question. "Do you know why I'm here?" Ion said nothing. The future Ion leaned forward. "I'm here because I've been watching you." Ion felt a chill run down his spine. "Watching me?" "Yes, why?" The future Ion's eyes softened. "Because every choice you make creates me." Ion didn't understand. "I don't get it." The future Ion gestured around the room. "This version of me exists because of what you do next," he said. "Every time you choose comfort over growth, I feel it. Every time you give up early, I live with it. Every time you tell yourself you'll start tomorrow." He paused. "I become weaker." Ion swallowed. "And if I don't?" he asked. The future Ion smiled faintly. "Then I become stronger." Silence stretched between them. Ion didn't know what to say. He'd never thought of his future as something alive, something watching him, something depending on him. "Why are you telling me this?" Ion asked. The future Ion stood up slowly. "'Cause you still have time." He stepped closer. "But not as much as you think." Before Ion could respond, the room began to fade. The walls dissolved into darkness. The floor disappeared. And suddenly Ion was somewhere else. He was standing in a small office. The lights were dim. Papers were scattered across a desk. A man sat in a chair, his shoulders slumped, his eyes empty. It took Ion a moment to realize who it was. It was him, older, but not like the future version he had just seen. This version was different, broken, tired. "What is this?" Ion asked. The future Ion stood beside him. "This," he said quietly, "is one of the futures you create if you keep waiting." Ion watched as the older version of himself stared at a rejection email on the screen. He looked defeated, hopeless, like someone who had run out of chances. He had dreams too, the future Ion said, but he kept delaying them. He kept telling himself he'd start when he felt ready. Ion felt his chest tighten. What happened to him? The future Ion answered softly. He never started. The scene changed again. Now Ion saw another version of himself. This one was healthier, stronger, focused. He was working late, but he wasn't miserable. He was alive, driven, proud. This future, the future Ion said, comes from small choices. Waking up when you don't feel like it, trying when you're afraid, continuing when it's hard. Ion watched in silence. He realized something terrifying. Both futures were possible. Both were real, and the only difference was him. The future Ion looked at him one last time. "I don't need you to be perfect," he said. "I just need you to not abandon me." The darkness returned, and Ion woke up. He was back in his room. The fan was spinning again. The crack in the wall was still there. Everything looked normal, but he wasn't. He sat up slowly, his heart racing. The chair across the room was empty, but somehow he knew his future was still watching, waiting, hoping. Ion picked up his phone. For the first time in a long time, he didn't open social media. Instead, he opened his notes, and he wrote one sentence. "I won't abandon you." He didn't know exactly what would happen next. He didn't know how hard it would be. But he knew one thing. His future was real. It was watching him. And for the first time in his life, he decided to become someone his future would thank.